Discover the Rio Party Rooms. Enjoy the 24-hour all-inclusive service with themed parties and freebies, so your only worry is...
Oh, wait a minute. Okay. Put your shovel on there. What part is where? That should be right here.
On January 3rd, 1990, a tip from an informant led police to a long-abandoned farm in Kirtland, Ohio. But what followed next would haunt their life forever.
There was only a small path because the whole west side of the barn was stacked with garbage. They had some pieces of dried clay on them. And I said, someone's been digging here.
A dozen firefighters had arrived to help clear the area. As they began digging, a foul stench started filling the barn.
Once they started digging, it didn't take long before they were getting that smell. They called it the odor of death. It's really more like rotten meat. And as they worked, they discovered one body after another. And their hands had been duct taped together and their feet had been duct taped together. Each of them had been shot multiple times.
Kirtland had never seen anything like this before. The gruesome discovery shocked the small town, and while the local police responded quickly, the scale of the mass murder meant they needed help from outside and other departments. That's when they called in Lieutenant Daniel Dunlap from the Lake County Sheriff's Office.
No, there was some mention of paramilitary activities. The individuals that were here complained indicated they were survivalist teachers, and they did practice the survival trades or sports, and they did have weapons, but we examined them. One reason that the one federal agency assisted us was that we wanted to find out if there were any automatic weapons, and there were not.
Meanwhile, the bodies had been buried beneath layers of garbage and debris in the barn, making the digging process long and arduous. It took nearly 8 hours for the firefighters and investigators to exhume the remains. When the bodies were finally unearthed, it became clear that they had been hastily buried, with their heads, hands, and feet all bound with duct tape. Each family member had been shot multiple times before being covered in lime, a substance used to speed up decomposition.
The bodies were very deteriorated. They had been covered with lime for a long time.
Despite the lime, the bodies were still recognizable enough for identification. The bodies belonged to the Avery family, who were once the picture of a perfect American household and had now been brutally wiped out.
It's hard to believe that, I've passed this place 100 times, and never, thinking.
Dennis Avery, 49, was a hard-working man devoted to his family and faith, earning him respect throughout the community. His wife, Cheryl, 46, was known for her warmth and kindness, a mother who adored her 3 daughters. Trina, the eldest at 15, was just beginning to find her way in the world. Rebecca, 13, had a passion for learning, and little Karen, just 7 years old, was the light of the family. They were deeply rooted in their religious beliefs, living a simple yet fulfilling life in a close-knit community. But those same religious beliefs, once the glue that bound the family, slowly twisted into something far darker and more sinister, dragging them down a harrowing path toward their inevitable, tragic demise. Authorities soon uncovered that the farmhouse was being rented by none other than Jeffrey Lundgren, a name that sent a chill through Kirtland, infamous for his dark and radical reputation. Jeffrey Lundgren, initially known to local authorities as a religious extremist linked to the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, soon gained a terrifying reputation as his radical beliefs led him down a darker and more violent path.
You would look at them and say, this is all American family. The people working middle-class jobs, being consistent and productive members of their faith and in their communities. They came looking for something that they felt was missing in their lives. They were people of faith. They wanted to belong to something, and that's how they ended up, I believe, with Jeff Lundgren, a self-contained prophet.
Early on, law enforcement became aware of his name through reports that he was plotting a possible takeover of the Kirtland Temple, a sacred site for RLDS members.
We're in very close discussion with the law authorities, and they helped us to understand that we needed to be careful about our own personal activities.
On January 4th, 1990, the chilling discovery of the Lundgren barn sent shockwaves across the nation as news coverage of the case dominated headlines.
One body at a time, slowly. Paramedics and firemen carried the 5 out of the barn tonight. It took about 8 hours for local police and federal agents to dig through the floor of the barn and exhume the body.
As the investigation unfolded, Jeffrey's former followers, those who had distanced themselves from his control, began to come forward with harrowing stories.
There were 18 FBI agents and 4 of us. The plan was we were going to do the interviews to hopefully get probable cause for the escort.
They were brought in for interrogation, and their statements showed a disturbing face of his manipulation and the horrors he planned within his group.
Did any law enforcement officer talk to you at that time?
Yes, sir. The FBI interviewed me. They asked if I had knowledge that Jeff was going to take over the Kirtland Temple. My response to that was no.
You either told an outright lie or given direct answers.
Confessions revealed that on the fateful night of the murders, Jeffrey had led his followers to West Virginia, a place he ominously referred to as the wilderness.
We ended up in West Virginia, it's a gold mining land.
That was where we were supposed to see God. But the basic tone was, I think we were all in shock that something had happened.
In Virginia, Jeffrey claimed they would be cleansed of their sins. He promised the group the imminent return of Christ, a prophecy that would never come true.
Then I realized that I thought I turned my life over to God, and God just turned out to be a man that was really mentally ill.
In the months that followed, Jeffrey's control tightened into a reign of terror. Using coercion, threats, and manipulation, he forced women in the group into unwanted sexual relationships under the name of spiritual marriages. Even his wife, Alice, could no longer endure his betrayal. She left him, fleeing with their children to her parents' home. But Jeffrey, unwilling to let go, tracked them down before eventually abandoning his followers entirely to move to California in January 1990. As the cracks in his facade widened, the remaining members of the group began to confront a horrifying truth. They had been deceived by a false prophet. The realization of their part in cold-blooded murders weighed heavily on their conscience, and that's what drove many to come forward with confessions. These confessions revealed deeply disturbing details, but they left one critical question unanswered. What had driven the brutal murders of the Avery family? Determined to uncover the truth, investigators turned their focus to Jeffrey's past. What they discovered unveiled an entirely new chapter of delusion and horror. Born on May 3, 1950 in Independence, Missouri, Jeffrey Lundgren grew up steeped in religious tradition. His parents, Donald and Lois Lundgren, were devout members of the RLDS, raising Jeffrey and his younger brother with strict religious principles. However, beneath this structured upbringing lay a darker side to Jeffrey's personality. From a young age, he exuded arrogance and an unyielding belief that he was destined for greatness. This inflated sense of self-worth only grew more dangerous over time, and by 1984, Jeffrey had convinced himself and others that he was a prophet chosen by God. Seeking a platform to spread his divine calling, Jeffrey moved his family to Kirtland, Ohio in 1984.
Jeff felt that God had revealed to him that we would move to Kirtland, Ohio. And he really believed that that was his ministry.
He took on a seemingly innocuous job as a tour guide at the Kirtland Temple. This position, however, gave him access to vulnerable members of the RLDS who were questioning their faith. Among these disillusioned members were Dennis and Cheryl Avery, a deeply religious couple with 3 young daughters. The Averys, dissatisfied with the church's perceived liberal direction, were eager for spiritual guidance. Jeffrey used his twisted interpretation of Scripture, which he called chiasm, to manipulate the Averys and convince them that he had divine authority. With his charm and strong belief in his own teachings, he drew them in, cementing their unwavering devotion.
I think Jeff found whatever a person's greatest need or weakness was, and then he portrayed himself as being the person that could provide that need.
The Avery family's trust in Jeffrey was unwavering. Dennis and Cheryl were so convinced of his teachings that they handed over $10,000 from the sale of their home, a substantial sacrifice for their family of 5. Their financial dependence, combined with their deep emotional faith in him, made them easy targets for his manipulation. Sadly, this vulnerability would ultimately lead to their tragic end. By 1989, Jeffrey's teachings had taken a dark and ominous turn. Jeffrey preached that bloodshed was essential to demonstrate unwavering faith, claiming it was a divine requirement. His followers, fully brainwashed, accepted his twisted teachings without question, ready to carry out his horrifying commands.
Hey, we were told what to say and what not to say. And after
Who told you that?
Among the cult, paranoia and fear grew, particularly toward the Avery family. Jeffrey accused them of not being fully devoted to the cause, labeling them as weak links in the group. In his mind, the Averys were expendable.
Dennis Avery was very unique, and I guess Jeff didn't like Dennis because he said he was a miserable excuse for a man.
Cheryl was a rather enthusiastic supporter of what Jeff was teaching. Cheryl was determined to be part of the group.
He convinced his followers that sacrificing the family was God's will, a horrific act of devotion that would solidify their standing in the eyes of the divine.
At some point, as the time to leave Kirtland drew closer and closer, Jeff said he had been reading diathetically, and the scriptures had called for a sacrifice. It had to be a blood sacrifice.
And what that required was a sacrifice or the death of a person of their sins.
And that act had to transpire so that we could go into the wilderness and immediately see God.
During this time, Jeff started teaching that a third of the world was made to live with Christ, a third of the world would have to fight for that, and a third of the world was made to be destroyed.
Jeffrey announces that he has been told to eliminate the most sinful members of the group. And in his view, the most sinful members of the group are the Avery family.
In preparation for the horrifying act, Jeffrey ordered his followers to dig a pit in the barn on his rented farmhouse property. For 5 long days, they toiled on the compacted earth, either unaware or in deep denial of the grim purpose the pit would soon serve.
Nobody knew what was really going to happen. And then he started having them clean out this area in the barn.
We had some of us out digging a hole in the barn. A grave, he said.
There were different people that did do the digging. I did, Dennis did, Keith did, Damon Lundgren, and also Greg Winchett assisted in the digging and preparing this hole.
What size was the hole?
It was about 36 inches deep, maybe a little more, 40 inches or so in some places perhaps, and it was maybe 8 foot by 8 foot.
While we were digging, I was scared and didn't know, I thought I might be digging my own grave, Jeff wanted everyone to meet for dinner that night. He said the fog at the farm was blood red, which, what does that mean? Were we being summoned to be part of a sacrifice? What were we being summoned for? It's kind of the feeling we got.
Meanwhile, the Avery family, blissfully unaware of their impending doom, continued to interact with Jeffrey and his followers. On April 10th, 1989, they were invited to dinner at the Lundgren farmhouse, a meal that would be their last. Despite his growing hatred, Jeffrey kept up the appearance of hospitality, masking his true intentions and leaving the Avery family completely unaware of the danger that awaited them.
We knew very well it could be one of us or someone of our family. No one really knew who was going to end up in that hole for sure.
I didn't know if we were on the list to be destroyed.
I had a suspicion that I would be one of those that was executed.
It never crossed my mind to tell them to run. Never crossed my mind to pick up the phone. Never crossed my mind to walk out the front door and leave. I remember the only two thoughts that went through my mind that night were, if it is happening, it must be God's will. And the other thought was, I'm a sinner and I'll be next. The house got really quiet. And I looked out to the front room and all the men were gone, except for Dennis Avery. And Sharon and I did up the dishes and put away the leftovers, and